Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this conversation with Chris Pappas, Congressman Chris Pappas, and New Hampshire's young people. If we haven't met, my name is Will Stewart, and I'm the Executive Director of Stay Work Play New Hampshire, a statewide nonprofit whose mission is to attract and retain more young people here in the Granite State. Stay Work Play is super excited to host this conversation today with Congressman Pappas. From the federal COVID-19 response to tackling housing issues and student debt, what happens in Washington has a big impact on New Hampshire's young people, as we'll hear more about today. Our format this morning will first have Congressman Pappas give us a brief update on what's going on in DC before devoting the rest of our time to answering as many of your questions as we have time for. Before we begin, let me tell you a little bit about today's guest. Chris Pappas is a lifelong resident of Manchester and a small business owner who represents New Hampshire's 1st Congressional District in Washington. In Congress, he serves on both the Veterans Affairs and Transportation and Infrastructure committees. Congressman Pappas is focused on healthcare issues that matter most to Granite Staters, including improving access to healthcare, lowering the high cost of prescription drugs, combating the addiction epidemic, and ensuring veterans get the benefits that they've earned. Before entering the U.S. House of Representatives, Chris served as a member of the state's Executive Council. In this role, he worked with governors of both parties to implement Medicaid expansion, expand treatment and recovery service, and approve funding for family planning providers. In recent weeks, Chris has worked with leaders across New Hampshire to protect the Granite State's Main Street economy and health and well-being during this challenging time. He has called on Congress to subsidize the cost of COBRA coverage for those who have lost their jobs, introduced legislation for the Too Small to Fail Act to provide billions in zero-interest loans and direct grants to small businesses, and providing testing and treatment available free of cost for children and anyone on Medicaid. He has also called for action to keep prescription drugs affordable in the next COVID-19 relief package, and introduced 2 bills to make sure our veterans have access to affordable COVID-19 treatment and care as well. The legislation that Congress has passed so far has brought more than $164.5 million in funding to New Hampshire healthcare providers so far, including $17 million worth of funding for testing. Please join me in welcoming Congressman Chris Pappas.
Well, thanks very much, Will. It's great to be with you and the Stay Work Play team. Thank you all for jumping on the Zoom today. Obviously, this is our new way of doing business right now, and I find that at the end of the day, after my 12th Zoom meeting, that you can connect and reach a lot more people around the state than maybe the way we used to do things, driving from town to town or city to city. So I'm really glad to be with you today, and I look forward to answering your questions. Clearly, this is a crisis that none of us have ever lived through before. And so in many ways, we are figuring this all out together. We've passed some significant bills in Washington to respond to this crisis, and more work needs to be done to make sure, especially as we look out over the horizon to the economic implications of this, that we're meeting people's needs and allowing individuals to get back up on their feet. First and foremost, this is a public health crisis, and we've got to make sure we beat this virus if we're going to hope to be able to return to life as we knew it, going to be able to allow our businesses to resume their activities, and to be able to get back out into society. But we've got to be very careful about how we approach this phase right now. I have been calling for and working with the delegation to ramp up our testing strategy. We know from the very beginning we have been woefully inadequate here in New Hampshire and in other states across the country with the number of people that we can test, the ability to get a quick result, and ensure that we can protect individuals and patients in our healthcare system. We have seen a number of really heartbreaking stories lately about individuals that we're losing here in New Hampshire, especially in our long-term care facilities and nursing homes. And so the state's made some good announcements about steps forward on additional testing sites and deploying these mobile teams to some of these critical facilities that have been highly impacted. But we need the federal government to do more in terms of a national strategy, especially with the supplies. We need more swabs, more of the chemicals and testing reagents. So we continue to lean on FEMA and the administration for that support so New Hampshire can build this up. That has to be in place in order for us to really be able to talk seriously and honestly about how we can reopen aspects of our society and our economy moving forward. And we still have more work to do on that front. We also have to ensure that we're giving people the lifeline they need to weather this storm. So whether it is the more than 150,000 individuals in our state who are on unemployment right now, whether it is our student population that is either remote learning or contending with how they can ensure they're continuing their education, whether it's our recent graduates who are trying to figure out what this looks like for them as they would like to be in the job market right now. We have to understand and appreciate that younger generations, and we saw this during the 2008 Great Recession, especially our recent graduates, are the ones who often bear the brunt of the economic misfortune that is out there. And we have to ensure that we don't lose a whole nother generation of individuals who aren't able to get into a career that they want or to get ahead and stay ahead. So I'm deeply concerned that what we're facing right now is far more uncertain and potentially far more painful economically than even what we experienced in the Great Recession in 2007 and 2008 and the years immediately following. And that means we have to continue to look for ways to go big now, to forestall and prevent some of the worst economic impacts of this from reaching us here in New Hampshire, and to make sure that people are able to meet their basic household needs and expenses. We've done one round of direct support to individuals. We're at the point where in the second month of this, as more rent and other bills and mortgages are coming due, we need to look at a second round of economic impact payments through the IRS to make sure individuals can meet these needs. I'm also mindful of the fact that our economy here in New Hampshire is driven by our local businesses, our Main Street businesses. 99% of the employers in New Hampshire are our small Main Street businesses. They've been accessing some of the new programs, including the Paycheck Protection Program. We've had over 20,000 businesses to the tune of about $2.5 billion in New Hampshire get support through that program. But that only works if you can hire people back. And that only works if it's safe for you to resume your business as you were used to doing before this pandemic was around. And so I think we need to provide some more flexibility through those programs in terms of the percentages of how you can spend down that loan and also the time horizon of it, understanding that it's going to take longer than June 30th for our economy to get back to where it needs to be. So I think we have to first and foremost treat this as the public health crisis that it is, make sure New Hampshire has the tools it needs to succeed, but also understand that the long-term economic implications are significant. They are across the board. They are comprehensive. And we have to continue to look for legislative remedies right now that can deal with the severity of the crisis that we're facing. So I thank you all for jumping on here. I look forward to hearing your thoughts and answering questions that you might have. My team is also available to assist anyone. If you have questions about particular issues, whether it's an IRS issue or an issue with student loans, we're happy to hop on the phone with you. And Carrie Thurman, who's my district director, is on the line here today. She'll drop her contact information into the chat so you know how to reach us if we can go to bat for you directly and personally. But look, it's a trying, concerning time. I think the phrase can't be overstated enough that we are all in this together. We are finding out ways that the health of one individual directly impacts the health of another individual. We're understanding the basic necessities that people need to make it through the day, whether it's a roof over your head, food on the table, or making sure that you can meet your expenses. We're also finding out that the generosity of the people of New Hampshire is shining through at a time like this. So to all of you who are pitching in for nonprofits and charitable organizations, looking for ways to get senior citizens their groceries or to make sure that PPE gets to the right places. People in this state are responding in a really significant way and helping out with the overall need that exists. So if we continue to pull in that same direction and continue to identify that sense of common purpose that we all have in fighting this, we're going to come out stronger and hopefully in a way that allows everyone to reach their full potential. So Will, thanks very much for the opportunity and look forward to the questions today.
Thank you, Congressman, for being able to join us today and to take the time. It's great to be able to hear firsthand what's going on down in Washington. Of course, as we said, we want to to have this be a conversation, of course, with young people in New Hampshire. And we're going to start today with some questions that were submitted as part of our registration process. And if time allows, we'll move to questions submitted in the chat below. So if anybody has them, feel free to drop them in there. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can, but we can't make any promises. So we'll get started. When I call your name, for those who have pre-submitted questions, if you could please unmute yourself and ask your question directly to Congressman Pappas. So up first is Nisa Marks.
Good morning, Congressman. Thanks for being with us and for listening to young people in the state. As a young person, I'm particularly concerned about climate change. So thank you for your support of the Green New Deal. It seems that recovery funding, beyond just the relief phase, but thinking forward to recovery, presents the opportunity for large-scale, well-paid employment to complete infrastructure projects, which I know you're passionate about, as well as green energy, energy efficiency, and water quality projects. So I'm curious what specific measures you will advocate for as part of coronavirus relief bills and in conversations with our governor to incorporate elements of the Green New Deal into coronavirus re-employment and recovery plans.
Thanks for the question. And it's important that we think as we have the conversations around putting people back to work and stimulating our economy, that we have a conversation about infrastructure. And members of both parties, I think, are ready to have this conversation. I sit on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and our committee a couple of months ago outlined an action plan for a $1.5 trillion infrastructure program. We just can't be rebuilding what we have the way it exists. We have to be planning for the future. We have to make sure our infrastructure is resilient, that we're using new technologies and new materials that are cleaner and greener. We have to understand that there are more emissions in the transportation space than even in the energy industry right now. And so we have an opportunity to create a future that is going to reduce our carbon footprint, make sure we're being responsible as we move forward. And we can create a win-win around infrastructure where we're building resiliency, we're making investments, and we're creating good paying jobs. So I think this conversation has to happen as we move into the next legislative phase, which is economic stimulus. There is significant work that has to happen on our roads and bridges, but we also need to be talking about mass transit, our bus systems. We'd like a rail connection here in the Manchester area, commuter rail to Boston, and that's an idea that we hope we can continue to push forward. I've got a bill in that creates a grant program for active transportation systems, so rail trail projects and other local connections that can be made to help build out a bigger network of transportation corridors where you can bike to work, you can walk, you can recreate, which would be a great amenity for the state of New Hampshire. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of money available for that right now. Usually the paving and bridge work crowds everything else out. But we got to think about the diversity that we can create in the transportation space, the interconnectedness. And I think this opportunity we have right now around infrastructure is one way we can keep that conversation going. So some of the other facets of the committee proposal include building out a charging network across our country, which is going to be crucial if we're going to see the change in the types of vehicles that are out there on the road. So I'm excited about some of the opportunities that we have. And even the work that's happening in the Senate on their highway bill. They've talked about resiliency in their bill. Even some members of the Senate that, for whatever reason, doubt the science behind climate change are still seeing what's happening in their states and in their districts. And so let's not be blind to what we're facing right now. We have a short amount of time to be able to act boldly, and we're hoping through infrastructure we can help facilitate that change. So thanks for the question.
Yes, thank you, Nisa. And thank you, Congressman. The next question comes from James Finnegan.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you for your time. Even in the midst of this crisis, the cost of raising a family in New Hampshire seems to keep going up between housing costs, childcare costs, lack of paid family leave, and more. And while some aspects of these issues are most addressable at the state level, which do you view as the most immediately addressable And what can our representatives in Congress do to make staying in New Hampshire more affordable?
Yeah, thanks very much for that question. We know that affordability has long been a concern, especially for young people that are choosing where to locate, choosing where to start their careers, start their families. And we've got some work to do in New Hampshire. We did before this pandemic hit to make sure that we're addressing the affordable housing issue, as well as making sure that the income that you can earn here, the benefits that you have on the job, are commensurate with your talents, but also allow you to put down roots right here in New Hampshire. We want people to be able to make that choice. I think the issue of paid leave is coming into focus now, especially as we go through this pandemic. And part of the CARES Act, actually the predecessor legislation to the CARES Act, was an expansion of family leave policies in the United States to cover this pandemic, to allow individuals who are fearful for their own health or the health of a family member to be able to stay home and take care of themselves or that family member. Individuals who are lacking childcare, which is many people right now, are able to stay home with their kids if they need to. So that expansion was important, and the paid sick leave provision of that bill, I think, opened a lot of people's eyes to the needs that exist longer term. No one should have to choose between their own health and losing out on a day's work. And so we've seen some proposals come forward in New Hampshire on that front, and hopefully a compromise can be reached. We have a similar bill in Washington that Congresswoman DeLauro has introduced, and I think it's a good opportunity to make sure we're providing that support for working people, especially our younger workers here in New Hampshire that should have that benefit. So I think that as a result of this, the focus has been on people's health and the need to make sure they can take advantage of paid leave provisions. We expanded leave for our federal workers at the end of the last year as part of a negotiated budget deal. Republicans and Democrats came together and said, let's give paid parental leave to our federal workers. So I think this idea continues to gain steam, and your advocacy can help make a difference here at the state level in New Hampshire, but also with the companion legislation we have in Washington.
Excellent. Thank you both. Our next question comes from Sarah Reitzman. Sarah.
Thanks, Will, and thanks for being here, Congressman Pappas. How can we prepare for and safeguard against a foreclosure crisis and a tightened rental market during the economic downturn that will follow the pandemic?
Well, thanks for that question. And we don't have to look too far into history to see a foreclosure crisis that hit New Hampshire particularly hard. And it took more than 10 years, I think, to work that through our system and to make sure that the statistics were going in the right direction. But there was a lot of pain after the 2007-2008 Great Recession on that front. I think we need to take some critical steps, and there's an opportunity to create homeowner assistance funding in Washington, and I've signed on to a letter that would create a $75 billion fund to help provide mortgage and debt relief to individuals and families that need it right now. We've seen moratoriums on foreclosures and evictions in states like New Hampshire, and there are some federal provisions that are in place too. But look, when those expire, there's going to be a huge bubble of individuals that may not be able to deal with a balloon payment or make those back payments needed to avoid foreclosure or eviction. So we've got to focus on those individuals, and that's why I think the creation of a large-scale fund can help offset some of those costs. I know that one of the lifelines for a lot of Granite Staters during the last foreclosure crisis was making sure that individuals had access to justice, and so ensuring that you can find a legal advocate who can help you sort through all the documentation and paperwork, and make sure that the companies aren't coming after you, and that you can have some legal representation, and advice is really crucial. So I think making sure that we have support for those programs in New Hampshire would be helpful. I'll say this, we're also hoping to double down on our support for state and local government in the next bill. New Hampshire's received $1.25 billion, but we hope to get another tranche of funds to New Hampshire to deal with issues like this, because we feel that our state officials, our local officials know what the problems are in their communities, know how to direct these dollars in a way that can help people. So ensuring people can stay in their homes and find affordable housing is so crucial. And I hope we can flex some of those dollars to meet that need here in New Hampshire.
That's great to hear. Of course, housing affordability is one of our policy priorities here at Stay Work Play. So we're certainly very appreciative of the work that you're doing on this issue in Washington, Congressman, and also Sarah, who runs the Seacoast Workforce Housing Coalition. So a lot of work to be done on both the federal, state, and local levels, on this very important issue. Next up, we have a question from Sierra and Lucy.
Hi, Congressman. Similarly to some of the previous questions, the rising cost of rent, young people getting laid off, how do we retain young people in New Hampshire post this crisis? And this is a lot of the work that Will does as well.
Yeah, well, I think, we all have to continue to focus on how New Hampshire is affordable, that it's a place that has the kind of amenities that young people need and want in the community that they choose. That's why I think, in the transportation space, creating some of these opportunities around intermodal transportation and active transportation are exciting opportunities potentially for our communities and for our state to attract more young people. We have to look at the issue of student debt as well, especially the pressure that individuals will be under now, and the way that the job market picture is so murky. I think we have to look for ways to expand loan forgiveness and debt assistance programs. Congresswoman Custer put in a bill this week that I support that creates up to a $25,000 assistance for a frontline worker for loan forgiveness and debt assistance for themselves or for a family member in their household. And I think given the crushing burden that individuals are facing, we've got to make sure that, that payment, which can be one of the, biggest financial albatrosses that they face, that they can contend with it. So I think partnering with states on making sure that we can relieve the student debt burden is crucial. And I'll just add that our office is hearing from individuals about the status of student loans right now. And so if anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to our office if you have questions about federal programs or what assistance might be out there right now.
Thank you. Up next, we have a question from Joe Dillier.
Thanks, Will, and thanks, Congressman, for taking the time to speak with us today. So I have a question. You just spoke about student loan debt a little bit here, but I'm thinking further ahead and the economic effect that this pandemic will have. Do you think that there will be legislative federal action to help with student loan debt due to diminished opportunities for recent graduates? And I'm thinking this specifically for people who are graduating next year or in 2022.
Thanks for the question. And I think we have to see additional support in the next package. It's being called CARES 2.0 that's being developed right now. We're headed back to Washington on Monday, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to take up something next week. There was significant support in the last round of legislation that went to colleges and universities here in New Hampshire, and half of what each institution received went directly to students to help deal with and defray financial costs that they're experiencing right now. So I think that remains an area where we need to see some more work. We know how crushing this burden can be, and the federal government plays an important role as a backstop, as a guarantor of and issuer of some of these loans. And so its work moving forward is absolutely crucial to help students make it through this time period. So, education is going to look a lot different. We've seen some interesting announcements from schools here in New Hampshire that are either cutting tuition or coming up with alternative modes for education moving forward. Southern New Hampshire University had an interesting announcement recently where they're doing a flat $10,000 tuition for students. I think helping universities and colleges move in that direction with a focus on affordability and value over the next couple of years is going to be important to ensure that people can continue their education and do it in a way that's sensitive to the financial situation families are facing.
Thank you, Congressman, and thanks also for the pointed question on student debt. Joe, it's like housing affordability, student debt is another one of our big policy priorities here at Stay Work Play. So we have a very vested interest in what we can do about this this huge burden, which disproportionately affects young people here in New Hampshire, and serves to make this state, which is great in so many respects, but just a little bit less affordable, in conjunction with housing and other high cost of living here. So thank you for all of that. Our next question comes from Jackie Coffin.
Thank you so much for your time, Congressman. Healthcare is a topic that's really near and dear to my heart, so I appreciate the work that you're doing on that front. My question is, what do you believe are the long-term ramifications for Manchester and our economy due to COVID, and how do you think New Hampshire will recover from this?
Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, it's hard to see how we have an economy if we can't effectively deal with this health crisis. Everyone has been sacrificing, individuals, organizations, local businesses, to try to lower the curve. There are data points that are showing that things are successful, but really infection rates and death rates in our state have leveled off. We haven't seen them come down as much as potentially our public health officials would like by this point. So there's more work ahead. And we do, run the risk of a resurgence of this virus, whether it's in the coming weeks, later in the summer, in the fall. Many experts think it will be back. And until we have a workable vaccine and an effective treatment, it's hard to see how we can just flip a switch and go back to where we were before this pandemic was around. So that, has significant bearing on what the future looks like here in Manchester and communities around the state. I'm very concerned about the dislocation of local revenue as a result of this crisis. Businesses that can't pay property taxes, lack of parking revenues for cities, lack of revenue sharing from the state for rooms and meals taxes and things like that. There's going to be a lot of pressure on budgets. And we can't put communities like Manchester in a situation where they only have bad choices, whether it's raising property taxes or cutting vital services like police, fire, EMS, and education budgets. We just can't afford that, especially at this point in time, especially when our small business community is on life support. So I think we need to do more in the way of direct support to state and local government, ensure that those dollars are flexible to backfill for lost revenue, to ensure that vital services can move forward, that we don't see the kind of cuts that unfortunately would have to be made by many of these governmental entities. We need more support for local businesses, and it needs to be sustained over time so that they can retain their workers and adapt to the new environment. And then I think in addition to that, we can't do enough for our healthcare system and for our public health departments. The contact tracing that the Manchester Health Department and our State Department of Health and Human Services is going to have to do to make sure we isolate individuals and protect folks in our community is so essential to our overall success and our ability to ward off a resurgence of this virus. That's going to take some funding. Additional testing capacity is essential to protect workers and protect our residents, and we can't put a premium on that. And in addition to that, just support for our overall healthcare system, making sure individuals have access, but also that our hospitals and community health centers are economically viable moving forward. They're under a lot of financial strain right now. So that's a long answer to say this is all encompassing. And I think both through direct support to our government, to our small businesses, to our individuals, and to our healthcare system, that's the sort of whole of government response that we need to make sure that we're dealing with all facets of this crisis.
Thanks for the question, Jackie. Next up, we have one from Heidi Karajcic.
Good morning. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. So my question is regarding young professionals, and what do you see as the biggest challenge for young professionals in New Hampshire, and how do you see yourself as being able to help?
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. I mean, I think it continues to be a question of affordability to make sure our families can, deal with the costs that exist in a place like New Hampshire. But my concern moving forward is about the job market. Just because we have 150,000 individuals that have filed initial claims for unemployment in our state, it's going to be hard for so many of our businesses to resume their activities. Some are maybe in a more fortunate category than others if they're a technology company or something where you can maintain social distancing, where people can be protected on the job. But we want to make sure that those opportunities continue to be available. We've seen a great deal of innovation happening in education, in healthcare, in so many spaces. A lot of that innovation is going to be here to stay. So how can we take advantage of these changes that we're seeing happening around us, the new way that some of our companies have of doing business, and support those moving forward as a way to ensure that jobs are there for our graduates and our young professionals. That's going to be really important coming out of this. So I think we're going to need to focus on workforce in a new way. Before this pandemic, we talked a lot about workforce in terms of shortages in certain areas, and in terms of debt relief. That certainly has to be part of it moving forward. But I think we also have to talk about training and making sure that individuals can find the skills and get into a position that's going to meet their needs and is also something that is sustainable for the duration of this pandemic. So we're looking at legislation that we can support that's going to help on that job training front to make sure that individuals have access to skills and to make sure there are good jobs available for folks right here. But there's a lot of pressure, and as I said before, I think that so much of the weight of this does fall on the shoulders of younger people, and we'd love to continue to partner with Stay Work Play on strategies of how we can alleviate that burden and make sure we're responding in a responsible manner.
Thank you. And, I'll maybe I can jump in here with a question myself that's, related to kind of post-pandemic workforce issues, young people, and, really, Heidi there was a great example. I don't know if you saw when her picture popped up, but she's there with her baby, and, a lot of young people, of course, are home with kids right now. What can be done on the childcare front? It's another big focus of our policy priorities here at Stay Work Play, and really impacts the workforce. If you don't have childcare, which we do have a childcare shortage here in the state. What can we do to get people back to work to make sure their kids are being taken care of so they can?
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. And it's incredible what parents are going through right now that are involved in their kids' educations, where the kids are at home, they might be working from home as well. It's an incredible balancing act. So my hats are off to Heidi and all the other parents that are making things work right now through some really stressful times for everyone. But I think the childcare piece is absolutely crucial. There are limited opportunities there for childcare. And, physically, if you're going back to work, you need to know that there are opportunities there if you're going to be able to, get back into the workplace. We've been working and communicating with state officials on, rules around childcare facilities. Obviously, we want to make sure that things are safe for kids, that it's a healthy, nurturing environment. So, we'll continue to have those conversations. And I just think, looking for ways to provide tax credits and additional support for families for quality childcare is important moving forward. I think we're all appreciating the needs that exist. So to the extent that will help us restore and build out our network of childcare providers in New Hampshire, I think those are ideas worth supporting.
Excellent, thank you. Now, kind of jumping in, to some of our questions in the comments section, we have one from Louise Ewing.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you so much for holding this forum. I'm wondering if you could address what is being done to protect federal, state, and local elections voter registration and the United States Postal Service? And is that going to become part of the next CARES Act that comes through?
Thanks very much for the question, Louise. As we're staying at home and doing our part to lower the curve, there are a few individuals who are on the job who we encounter in the course of our day. It might be the grocery store clerk on our run to the grocery store. Could be the postal worker who comes to our home delivering the mail. And I think our postal service is just that. It's a service. And it's up to the federal government to make sure that it has the financial capacity to meet its demands right now, even in the face of a loss of revenue. I was talking recently to a postal employee who said that in Nashua, they're processing about 300,000 packages a day. It's like Christmas time, only without the staff to meet the demand. So they're working around the clock to get you your packages, your medications, your information, your bills, and we've got to support them. So there was going to be funding in the CARES Act for our postal service. It was negotiated between the House and Senate. The administration decided that was a non-starter for them and asked that provision to be struck. I'm hoping that with some additional outside pressure, we can see another negotiated compromise on how we can provide some support for our postal service. They'll be critically important as we move forward and we talk about elections, because we know that it might not be a safe scenario for individuals to be out at the polls and voting, especially if we see a resurgence of this virus in the fall. And that's why having access to absentee balloting here in New Hampshire is so crucial. Our Secretary of State estimates that nearly half the population might take advantage of an absentee ballot provision and vote from home and through the mail. So the Postal Service is needed for that, but we also need more support for our city and town clerks who are going to be doing these mailings and processing these ballots. They're not geared up for something like this. So there's going to have to be a ramp up. That's going to take some funding. There was some initial funding that came in that is going to be used for planning purposes. But I think we need to see another round of funding to states to be able to carry out what's, I think, going to be much more heavily a mail-in election. So thankfully, we've got the green light from our Secretary of State, but I think we need federal legislation to say that any American can vote by mail in this upcoming election and to provide some support for state and local government to carry that out. That's critically important, that everyone can exercise their right to vote without fearing for their safety, and that we avoid what we saw in Wisconsin, which was a system that just wasn't ready for the pressure it was put under by so many individuals requesting a mail-in ballot.
Thank you. We have another question from Joe Dillier. Joe.
Yeah, thanks, Will. So, Congressman, a lot of people have started working from home through this pandemic, as well as everyone getting and schools getting shifted to home and doing virtual education. And in a lot of rural places in New Hampshire, there isn't the broadband network to support that kind of remote working. And from what I understand, it seems like this remote work trend is probably going to continue even after the pandemic clears up. So are there any plans to make infrastructure upgrades to provide better high-speed networks for people in rural areas who are now forced to work from home?
Absolutely. There's a digital divide that exists, and it's here in New Hampshire based on geography and certain socioeconomic groups that might not have access to high-speed broadband. So that needs to be on the agenda moving forward. Our House Whip, Jim Clyburn, has done a lot of work on this issue, and the administration has been talking positively about making additional investments in high-speed broadband. So as we talk about infrastructure and economic stimulus, this is not a luxury, it's a necessity moving forward. This is akin to the rural electrification during the Depression and New Deal era. And I think we can do something really positive here for New Hampshire to meet the needs that our local businesses and our residents have to get access to information. I was on the line with librarians recently, and they were talking about how so much of their services now are online, but There are residents in their communities that can't access them, that might not even have access to internet services. They have a lot of folks coming to their parking lots so that they can pick up the Wi-Fi from the local library. Our schools are seeing that too. So this is a fundamental issue, and I think everyone should have access to this. We can deliver it. We can help build this out. And so I think there's federal funding that should be available for the infrastructure upgrades. And then, the states need to work with internet service providers and, the regulated community to make sure, that those services can be delivered in a cost-effective manner to residents across our state. So that's really vital. Thanks for raising that issue.
Thanks indeed. Have a question also come in via chat from Molly Lunowen. Molly.
Hi, Congressman Pappas. This is Molly. I'm joining with a very new baby. Her name is Clara, and I'm learning how hard it is for parents and others to juggle work and childcare. Luckily, I'm not working quite yet. But my question is, how can you or others make sure the voices of young people who are busy, who have student loan debt, who are struggling with the cost of housing, how can our voices be heard if sometimes it's hard for us to advocate, it's hard for us to run for office? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And I'll take it off video in case she wakes up.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Molly and Clara, for joining us. We'll be quiet so we don't wake her up, but congratulations to you, and hope everyone is safe and healthy. And what a great new addition during such a trying time for everyone. But thanks for raising that issue. I think New Hampshire is just such a well-positioned place for young people to make a difference and have their voices heard. And this organization certainly is a great megaphone for young professionals to communicate with policymakers and to come up with ideas and work up concepts that would be helpful for the young professional culture here in New Hampshire, and to continue to attract and retain more of our young talent right here. In addition to that, there are opportunities to serve, whether it's at the local or state level. And we've seen an increasing number of young people taking advantage of that and really being able to make a difference, even at a young age without a lot of experience. I was one of those people. I got elected to the state legislature when I was 22. And I was told early on by some of the more senior members that you got to wait your turn and just be quiet for the first term. And then once you learn the ropes, you can, start to file legislation and, really speak your mind. Well, you know what? We don't need to wait around. I think the time for a younger generation to have their voices heard is right now. So many of the issues that I hear from you that you care passionately about just can't wait. Whether it's some of these affordability issues we've talked about and family issues, whether it's climate change or gun violence or some of the other issues that young people have been speaking out forcefully on. The time is now to hear you and to channel that energy, that concern into action. So I see myself as a conduit for that based on the conversations that I have. One of the great things about going to Washington is you realize that young people run the show. They run your office and they help keep you grounded in terms of what their peers are talking about. But we always want to try to create a space for you to be heard. So we look forward to continuing to engage with Stay Work Play and younger voices across our state in making sure that we're understanding what you have to say and translating that as best we can into action in Washington.
Thank you, Congressman. And another priority of Stay Work Play is getting young people involved at every level. And ultimately, kind of the why we're focused on this is the more involved you are in your community, whether you're running for state office or you're serving on the planning board or volunteering for a local nonprofit, is it helps you get connected. It connects you to your community, to your region, to your state, and thus makes you more likely to leave once you've had an opportunity to help affect it positively, for the future. That was a big impetus for our Changemaker Summit, New Hampshire Next, that we held last week. And you're really looking to get more young people involved in a variety of capacities here in the state. Have another question from Jackie Coffin.
So we have discussed relief for student loan debt. I was curious if anything is being planned or being done for medical debt that is both pre and post-COVID.
Thanks for that. I don't know that I've signed on to any legislation on that front, but our team can take a look at that. That's obviously a significant issue. And as we talk about healthcare, you know, we've got to deal with this issue of surprise billing and the sometimes unanticipated costs that can come with the coverage that you have. Sometimes you have insurance coverage, but it doesn't necessarily meet your needs. And you may still take on a lot of debt as a result of a procedure or a condition that you have. You know, that's why I think it's important that we're able to do something to make sure that billing is transparent and that patients, you know, aren't going to be penalized by some of these surprise bills. We were very close to a compromise on that in Washington, and that could be helpful going forward. But in terms of the debt issue, that's something I'd like to take a look at. And one of my health staffers is on the line here, and so he'll work with our team in Washington. Maybe we could get back in touch with you in terms of what is out there on that front, because that's another, you know, very significant, you know, financial burden that individuals are facing.
Most definitely. Next question in the chat comes from Jay Childs.
Hello, Congressman, and again, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. My wife is an RN in Boston, and she was tapped to treat COVID-19 affected patients now. She earns more working part-time in Boston than she could working full-time in New Hampshire. So how can this pandemic change the conversation and hopefully bring action around the issues of wages and pay, especially for essential workers, and also nationally how we pay for and deliver healthcare, and right now tie it so much to employment? Are these starting to shift the conversations?
Thanks, Jay, for the question, and we really appreciate what your wife does on a regular basis. I was over at CMC a couple weeks ago here in Manchester, and there was a salute to healthcare workers and great community response, and from fire, police, and EMS for, you know, those folks who are going in each and every day, and you know, the risk that they're taking for themselves and also for their families. And there's a lot of concern and anxiety among our healthcare workforce right now. And we need to be rewarding them for their service, honoring them for it, and looking for ways to make sure that financially that their needs are met. I think we need to be talking about a heroes fund for our healthcare workforce and our frontline workers right now, to make sure that you know, that they're being compensated for the risk that they're taking and that we can keep them in place. You know, New Hampshire has had a nursing shortage and a shortage of healthcare workers for a long period of time. And we've worked on this issue in terms of trying to provide additional programming and opportunities for folks to go into nursing through our college and university system here. But there's the issue that you mentioned of pay, where sometimes we get a new nurse who's trained up here, is working at a New Hampshire hospital, and then you know, transfers to Boston, where the pay grade is significantly higher. It's a tough commute, frankly, and it's tough on a family for someone to do that, and you'd much rather be working closer to home if you could. I think you know, we've got to deal with the immediate concern of the financial stability of our hospitals and our healthcare system right now. We're seeing our hospitals lose about $200 million a month here in New Hampshire. We've seen furloughs of, you know, hundreds of workers in the healthcare space across our state. And I have a long-term concern, especially for our more rural hospitals, about their ability to continue to provide critical services and access to certain parts of our state. So, you know, we've provided some significant funding to hospitals. More needs to be done to not only help them through this period, but as they open up and are able to take on more patients and do more procedures, we've got to ensure that they can, you know, keep their workforce in place and look to grow it. The transition to telemedicine has been, you know, remarkable and I think helpful for a lot of our providers. And I'd like to see the rules changes that we've put in place to, you know, on the billing front, help facilitate telemedicine, continue to move forward so that our providers here in New Hampshire can you keep utilizing those tools. And I think that would be helpful to make sure that we can attract and retain talent right here in New Hampshire. So it's definitely a longer term issue. And I think we've got to address the shorter term financial viability of these hospitals, and then, work with them on, how we can make sure we're rewarding people and keeping them right here in our communities wherever possible.
Thank you. I believe that's all the questions that we've had in the chat. I know we're running very short on time, just a few minutes left. Have one question that came in via the registration process. The gentleman, Jay Brunetti, a member of our Stay Work Play Advocacy Committee, ended up not being able to hop on today, but had what I thought was a good question. He said, what is Congress's plans for getting our social world back, especially for young people who are desperately craving social interaction?
Yeah. You mean outside of the virtual happy hours and the game nights and everything that have been going on? It's really about, if we're going to reestablish social connection, it's about testing, and it's about ensuring that people have the proper equipment and the proper information to be able to protect themselves when they're out in public. I think gatherings are going to look a lot different. It's going to be a while before the governor lifts his order and allows large groups to be able to congregate together. So I think we've got to be creative about how we do it, whether it's a social distanced event in someone's yard with a few people where people are wearing masks. That's something that potentially is appropriate. But if we're going to be able to get back to 200 people at a Stay Work Play event, sitting shoulder to shoulder in an auditorium, it's hard to see how we get there. But this is a healthcare crisis and an economic crisis. It is also a human crisis. And so while we're told to stay at home, we've got to find ways not to be isolated and to connect with one another. So certainly technology helps facilitate that, but we've got to find ways to restore the ability of people to connect with one another. And I just think that that's so important for the human condition. So we'll continue to work with the governor on this, and I think that Congress has a role to make sure that people are safe, and the success of controlling the infection rate is going to be tied to that testing and contact tracing regimen, identifying who has it, testing people even if they're asymptomatic. We know this virus is so efficient in terms of how it's transmitted because even before you have symptoms, or the 25 to 50% of people who don't have symptoms but have COVID-19 can transmit it. So being able to ramp up testing, especially for vulnerable communities, is going to be so important to allow us to restore certain aspects of our society and social interaction. But for now, we've got to keep doing it with a mask and doing it 6 feet apart.
Indeed. Did have one question come in to me via text, perhaps a little less serious than the kind of the weighty topics we've been focused on today, but somebody wants to know when the back room is going to have non-dairy ice cream options.
Oh gosh, well, when I last worked there and I was the ice cream maker, I used to make sorbet as well as sherbet, which is lower in dairy, but we had a few sorbet options back then. I haven't checked the flavor list since, but people miss those. When it's warm weather, you want to get outside and go for an ice cream cone, or there's a lot that we look forward to summertime, and certain activities that come along with that, and so we do long for those sorts of things, and hopefully we can make sure not only that you can get out, but get some non-dairy ice cream. I'll check in with them and make sure they're still making some.
All right, sounds good. So that's about all the time we have for today. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today for this great and engaging conversation and contributing to that. Thank you again, Congressman, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to speak with New Hampshire's young people and about the issues that are so critical and of interest to this to our demographic. It is very much appreciated. Thanks also, Congressman, for your work on behalf of all of us in Washington, and good luck to you and all of your congressional colleagues as you continue to help help the country navigate through this crisis. Did you have any closing remarks you'd like to make before we sign off today?
Well, I just want to thank everyone for their questions, for their thoughts, and I hope you'll stay in touch with our office. If you do need assistance or have any questions or have some information you want to impart to us, you can find us online. It's pappas.house.gov. We also have a COVID-19 resource guide, some FAQs up on there too for some issues that come up quite a bit. But thanks for what you're doing. I think what's very clear is this nation did not have a playbook for how to handle a pandemic like this. We are writing it right now. And I hope that as a result of what we're going through, not only can we come through this stronger, but we can be better prepared to deal with the next crisis that hits, and also have a greater sense of how we're all connected and how all of our efforts, if we can channel them in the right direction, can really improve the fortunes of each and every one of us. So thanks for sharing your thoughts today, and everyone stay safe.
Indeed. So with that, thank you everyone for joining us this morning for the conversation, and have a great day.
Thanks. Take care, folks.